The very clear protagonist in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is Scott Pilgrim. Like a typical protagonist, Scott Pilgrim is faced with adversity, is present during all climactic moments, and most importantly, undergoes some form of change. From the very outset, Scott Pilgrim's character is established for the audience, who is provided with some background regarding his life via a short, comic-style intro sequence.
Not so long ago, in the mysterious land of Toronto, Canada, Scott Pilgrim was dating a high schooler.
In the sequence that follows, we learn that Scott's relationship with a high school girl is a bit odd given his age.
I'm 22.
In this scene, we learn about Scott's social life, being clued in that he has a girlfriend. Additionally, the way that Scott speaks about his girlfriend indicates a lot about the type of character that he
Have you
is.
even kissed her? We almost held hands once, but then she got embarrassed.
The way that Scott talks about his sexual life indicates that he is a dweeby character who lacks the typically masculine or heroic attributes of a male protagonist. When it comes to growth, Scott is something like a victim of his circumstances, and as such, has to go through a great learning process. This is part of Scott's character arc. He starts off somewhat clueless, constantly alarmed by his circumstances.
Please excuse my brother. He is chronically enfeebled.
He even seems to be unable to grasp the consequences of dating Ramona.
What did I do? What do I do?
However, he eventually catches on and begins to fall into the narrative. However, Scott also undergoes a significant transformational change, the kind of change that has an existential bearing. In other words, Scott had a realization that changed the way he saw the world. This transformation occurs during the repeat sequence at the Chaos Theatre. In order to defeat G-Man, Scott effectively summons the power of love, a driving force for him in the moment. However, love proves to be lacking as Scott is defeated by G-Man.
Death.
Scott then enters some form of afterlife and has an epiphany, or a great sudden realization of truth. Scott realizes that rather than fighting for Ramona, he ought to be fighting for himself. Upon having come to this realization, Scott rather fittingly says,
I feel like I learned something.
the audience is very clearly shown that Scott's motivation has changed during the second effort. When he challenges G-Man, he pulls out a different, more powerful sword. This symbolizes the power of self-respect. This ultimately leads Scott to defeat G-Man, win back Ramona, and defeat his inner demons. And in this way, Scott Pilgrim's character develops throughout the film.
Wicked.
In terms of establishment of character, Predestination is rather unconventional, in that the whole film is technically the establishment of the same character. However, if you take the various stages of the central character to be characters in and of themselves, then each one undergoes their own establishment and development. The first character whose identity we are shown is the barkeep. We see him wake up in a hospital bed, and from that point we get to see him act as the main protagonist throughout the film. We then learn, through segmented narration and image, that Ethan Hawke's character is a time traveler whose purpose is to stop a terrorist named the Fizzle Bomber. In this way, the Fizzle Bomber, a mysterious villain, is introduced into the film. In what the audience understands to be a plot to apprehend the Fizzle Bomber, the barkeep walks off the screen, where he then teleports to the bar. When it comes to establishment of character, the scene at the bar where John explains to the barkeep about his life is absolutely pivotal. The sequence spans nearly half the length of the film and involves a detailed recollection of the events passed by John. As an audience, we get a revelation as to John's tragic past. We find out that John actually started as an orphan girl who was named Jane. At an older age, she enlisted in a company called Space Corps. She got kicked out and then met a lover. The lover then leaves her. She falls pregnant and her baby gets stolen. She then has a hysterectomy, undergoes gender reassignment surgery, and adopts the name John. The barkeep as a character is primarily static, as he serves as a guide for the younger John. However, towards the end of the film, when the barkeep discovers that he is indeed the Fizzle Bomber, he undergoes something of a crisis.
I will never become you.
If you look at the film retrospectively, the main character undergoes immense development. Starting from Jane's transition to John, she undergoes a series of mentally confusing events. Yet, through the various crises that Jane, John and the barkeep encounter, they learn more about themselves and their respective pasts. For example, where John meets Jane, he begins to realize a lot about himself and his past, everything coming into place.
You found her. You know who she is, and you understand who you are. And now maybe you're ready to understand who I am.